I have tried to get rid of this thing for 8 years. Every time a kid comes to me and is like, can I borrow a tambourine for Spanish class? Yeah, here you go. And they always bring it back. Directors fear big drums. Turn on the throw off. Turn off the lever. One of the most fun instruments to play in the percussion section. Go grab yourself a tambourine. This is very much for a rock band or a pop ensemble. This is a xylophone. If you're still watching at home, go make yourself a sandwich and come on back. Hi, I'm Brett Hughes with Musician's Toolkit. Today we're going to talk about maintenance of the concert percussion instruments. Hi, I'm Brett Hughes with Musician's Toolkit. Today we're going to talk about maintenance of the concert percussion instruments. Let's get started. Odds are, if you own an assortment of tambourines, an assortment of triangles, and an equal assortment of other handheld percussion items, you've probably invested a good amount of money in those products. It's really important that we take just as good a care of these instruments as we do our timpani and our snare drum and our mallet instruments. After all, there's a good chance you may own more money in your handheld instruments than you think. So when we get ready to store these instruments, we really want to take care to make sure we're doing a good job with that. Every instrument has padded bags you can purchase that those instruments will fit in. I highly recommend, if it's in your budget, find bags for the instruments. If it's not, there's a couple other things to consider. We always want to store these instruments flat. We don't ever want to store them on end. So if you need to, you can store an instrument flat on a tabletop. I highly recommend even creating little cubby holes for each of your instruments. If you have an organized wall with multiple different cubbies, and this one's for this tambourine, and this one is for triangles, and this one's for castanets, not only does it make your organization very nice, tidy, it also makes it very easy to take inventory of what instruments you have and whether or not they're all there. Again, we probably spent a large amount of money on this. We want to make sure we know where they all are at different times. If you don't have the space to store the instruments flat and you can't afford the bags and cases for the instruments, another option is to install pegboard on your wall and hang pegs from the pegboard and then hang up the various instruments on the pegs. Again, this makes it very easy for your inventory purposes. It also keeps all the instruments in their own individual locations so that they don't do damage to each other in storage. Ultimately, no matter how you store the instruments in your classroom, you need to find a safe way to transport those instruments. Being small instruments like this, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be something specific for the percussion world. You can grab an old suitcase, a tote bag, anything that'll keep these instruments in nice, good condition without doing any damage to them. Take the instruments you need, put them in their various storage, pack everything up, throw the bag on your shoulder, and let's go to the gig. It's very important to remember when you're transporting the gear and when you're storing it in your classroom, you never want to stack the gear on top of itself. You don't want two instruments touching, and when you're transporting them, you don't want them banging around in the bag touching each other either. If you don't have cases for your instruments, go ahead and get some old hand towels or some pillowcases, anything that's soft that you can put between the instruments to help isolate them and keep them from doing damage to each other. When you see somebody playing timpani, odds are they might have 2 or 4 or 5 drums around them. The reason we have multiple drums when we play timpani is that each drum is only designed to hold a small range of notes. Timpani read in the bass clef staff, and they go from the D below the staff all the way up to about the A or the B flat above the staff. Each drum has a limited range within that series. So for instance, your 32-inch drum, your biggest drum in your set, the lowest pitch on that drum should be a D, and the highest pitch should be a B flat. That'd be the second line B flat in bass clef. The 29-inch drum, the lowest pitch should be an F, and the highest pitch should be a C sharp. That's the F right below the staff to the C sharp in the middle of the staff. The 26-inch drum, which is this drum, the lowest note on this drum will be a B, and the highest note will be an F sharp. This drum covers the range right in the middle of the staff. And then our 23-inch drum, our smallest drum, our lowest pitch on that drum will be a D, middle line in the bass clef staff, and the highest pitch will be an A or a B flat right above the top of the staff. The top note in each range is really dictated by the make of the drum. All we're going to worry about is making sure that the drums have the right bottom pitch. As long as our drums from 32 to 23 are D, F, B, D on their bottom pitches, we'll have all the notes we need. A good mnemonic device to use to remember that is that directors fear big drums. Get your drums set up, go stand behind them, and let that director fear you. One issue you'll see with a lot of the mallet instruments, especially in a school setting, is this metal piece we talked about. We refer to it as the chord saddle. Sometimes that saddle will bend. It should be perfectly upright, but occasionally it'll lean one way or the other. Lots of different things can cause this. Anything from accidentally hitting any of the bars on a door frame or against the wall, as simple as just setting something on top of the instrument would bend these saddles. It's an easy fix, something we don't have to worry too much about. Anybody can do it. A couple of different ways we definitely don't want to do it though. These bars instantly rest up against these chord saddles. We don't want to use the bar to try to adjust the saddle. The bar is made of wood, the saddle is made of metal. The metal will win that competition every single time. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to carefully remove the bars. Right? I'm going to unhook those bars from the saddle, and I'm just going to fold them over. I'm going to set them on top of a towel, just so they're not laying on top of the other bars. Right? And I'm going to find a pair of pliers. I have a pair of needle nose pliers. Any pair of pliers will work. And I'm just going to grab right at the top of those saddles. And I'm just going to bend them back upright. Right? Maybe down a little further if needed. I'm just going to check them all. You can also do this with a wooden or a rubber mallet. Again, please don't use a metal hammer, as this is a softer metal than most of your hammers are made out of, and you'll do damage to these chord saddles. But we'll get those upright. Once they're all looking good and vertical again, we'll just go ahead and carefully put those bars back on. Now all those bars are set up so they can resonate freely and that instrument will sound as good as possible. When we're done using our cymbals, we have to safely store them so that they'll be in good shape for the next time we need them. Sometimes we also have to move them. We're going to take a second and talk about how to safely store and move our cymbals. For a storage perspective, we really have two options. We can either store our cymbals flat, or we could store our cymbals on edge. The advantages to storing our cymbals on edge come from the ability to be able to grab them easily and move them where we need them. Sometimes when they're stored flat, they're a little tough to get off the surface. Now, if you're going to store them on edge, you're going to need different slots for cymbals and a dedicated cymbal storage area. Sometimes that's tough to do. However, storing them flat's really easy. We can lay them on any surface, put them in a drawer, put them on a tabletop. Anywhere that we have a flat surface the size of a cymbal, we're good to go. Now, if I want to stack multiple cymbals, I want to be careful and make sure that I put something in between the cymbals so that they don't rub against each other. This is just a felt pad that came with a cymbal case, but any fabric would do. That way I can stack my cymbals without them making a ton of noise against each other and without them doing damage to each other. Right? This is a really good option for storing cymbals flat. Our other option, which will also help us out with cartage, is I can always just store my cymbals in a cymbal bag or even a hard-sided cymbal case. Most cymbal bags will have dividers in them, so I can put multiple different types of cymbals in the bag without them touching each other. Now, I zip that up, I can take it out of the building and I'm ready to go. Or I can just store the cymbals in the case in the room, right? This is a great multi-use tool for that purpose. The hard-sided cymbal case is very similar. Cymbals go in there, put dividers in between them, right? And then this one's got wheels on it. I can wheel it out the building. It also is great to fly with, provides a lot more security to the cymbals if they're going to be in the back of a truck, things like that. I definitely at no point want to store the cymbal on its stand. The cymbal is very heavy compared to the stand. It's very easy to knock this stand over, tip it over, which will do a lot of damage to my cymbal. Also, when the cymbal is on top of the stand, it's begging to be played. If I leave a cymbal out on top of a stand, somebody's going to walk by and hit my cymbal. We don't want to do that. I want to use it for myself only. So take those cymbals off those stands, take them out of the Peyote cradle, put them in a bag, store them flat with dividers in between them. Any of those things will keep your cymbals in great shape and you'll be good to go. One of the most important families of the percussion world is the cymbal family. This is a sound that's very recognizable and sits on top of almost every ensemble. There are two different types of cymbals we're going to come across. Suspended cymbal, or a cymbal that would sit on a stand, and crash cymbals, also known as hand cymbals and a lot of times called Peyote. These two types of cymbals, when used in conjunction, really help us emphasize accents and important parts in different songs. Now, there are tons of different types of cymbals, and lots of different things will affect the sound you're looking for. The size of the cymbal will affect the sound, the thickness of the cymbal, the weight of the cymbal. Sometimes I want a really thick, heavy sound. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I need a really light sound. It's really good to have a nice selection of cymbals to be able to experiment with different sounds and make sure that we have exactly what we're looking for. In addition to the weight and the thickness and the size of the cymbal impacting how the cymbal sounds, the way the cymbal was made will also impact how it sounds. A lot of cymbals are made by being spun. You'll know cymbals are spun because you can look at them. They're very flat and they have these grooves that go all the way around the cymbal from where that cymbal was spun into this final shape. One other type of way to make a cymbal is to spin the cymbal and then go back and do what we call hand hammering the cymbal. So this cymbal was spun, just like that one, and then someone went through with a metal hammer and adjusted the surface of the cymbal by hammering out different dimples, which creates a little bit different complex pattern. Now, hammered cymbals generally have a little bit heavier sound to them. The decay lasts a little bit longer. We like to call it a little bit more complex sound. Whereas a spun cymbal generally has a little bit more brilliant sound and a little bit quicker decay. Choose those in addition with the size and the weight, and that'll really impact your overall sound as well. Remember, as a percussionist, first and foremost, you're a musician, and it's important that you always consider the sound you're producing. So whether it's Peyote hand cymbals or suspended cymbals, make sure you give some thought to what size of cymbal you want to use, what weight of cymbal you want to use, and experiment with a couple of different ones to make sure you're always producing the best quality sound. At some point, you're going to have to change the heads on your drums. It's important to know some of the different terminology you're going to come across when you're trying to purchase new heads. Different words that you're going to want to know what they mean are batter versus resonance. Again, batter heads are the heads we hit. Resonant heads are the heads that go on the bottom of the drum that vibrate sympathetically after we hit the batter head. The next most common terminology you're going to come across is one-ply versus two-ply. Lots of heads may look the exact same, and the difference is whether or not they're a one-ply head or a two-ply head. For instance, this is a one-ply head. That means there is one layer of plastic stretched between the flesh hoop in this head. Whereas this is a two-ply head. There's one layer of plastic stretched across the top, and then another layer of plastic stretched underneath it, both attached to the flesh hoop. The difference in a one-ply and a two-ply head is just how durable the head is. A one-ply head is a little bit thinner, obviously, and therefore not as durable. A two-ply head with two layers of plastic generally is a much more durable head. Lots of times we'll use two-ply heads for our batter heads and one-ply heads for our resonant heads, but not always. The next most important bit of terminology to know is the thickness of the head. Drumhead manufacturers use a measurement called a mil, M-I-L. If you have a head that is 7 mils thick, that means it's 7/1000ths of an inch thick. Heads range anywhere from 2 mil or 2/1000ths of an inch thick. You'll notice this is very thin. The plastic is very moldable. This is very popular for a resonant head. All the way up to 14 mil or 14/1000ths of an inch thick. A very heavyweight plastic, a very durable head to use as a batter head. Lastly, you're going to have to choose what finish you want on your head. Heads come as just clear plastic heads. They come as coated heads, which is still a plastic head with a coating applied to the plastic. This gives it a little bit of texture, which changes the sound ever so slightly. You'll also find other textures. For instance, this is what's called a calf tone head. This head is meant to mimic the sound of a natural skin head, but made with plastic. The advantages of using plastic over natural calf skin are that the plastic is much more durable, whereas the calf skin would be a little bit more fragile and substantially more expensive. So now that you know whether you want a coated head or a textured head or a clear head, and you know whether you want a 1-ply head or a 2-ply head, and you know how thick you want the different plies of your head, you're ready to go with ordering the heads. The last thing you have to do is just measure the size and get them ordered. The next set of instruments we're going to talk about are drums. Another name for a drum is a membranophone. That would be an instrument with a membrane stretched across a shell. We call them drums. There are 2 different types of instruments in the membranophone or the drum family. That would be those with 2 drum heads or 2 membranes versus those with 1 drum head or 1 membrane. These snare drums over here and this tom-tom here are examples of instruments that have 2 membranes. You can tell because there's a separate counter hoop and set of tension rods on the top that affect the batter head and the bottom that affect the resonant head. The single membrane instruments just have 1 counter hoop and 1 set of tension rods for a batter head, and there is no resonant head. The drum is just an open cavity. Snare drums, field drums, and some tom-toms are great examples of double membrane drums. Some of the other tom-toms and all of the hand drums are examples of the single membrane family of drums. And those are examples of double membrane and single membrane drums. All of the drums have many pieces of them that are the same. Whether we're talking about tom-toms or snare drums or hand drums, it doesn't matter. A lot of the pieces are exactly the same. One piece you'll find on every drum is the head or the membrane that you hit. We call that the batter head. On a snare drum, this would be the top head. On a single-headed drum, that would be the only head on the drum. The batter head is the head that you hit. The batter head sits inside what a lot of people call the rim. Its technical name is the counter hoop. The counter hoop counters the pressure of the batter head and is attached to the shell of the drum through these little screws. We call these screws tension rods. The tension rod screws through the counter hoop into a metal piece called the lug casing. The lug casing is directly attached to the shell of the drum. The way the tension is created over the head is stretched over the edge of the drum or over the shell. The counter hoop pulls down on that drum head, on the batter head in this instance. The tension rod pulls down on the counter hoop by screwing into the lug casing, which is attached to the shell of the drum. Now on a drum with 2 membranes, the exact same setup works on the bottom head. The bottom head is called the resonant head. The difference between a batter head and a resonant head is generally the thickness of the plastic. The batter head is generally a little bit stronger material since you're going to hit it. The resonant head is a thinner material so that it'll vibrate based on the batter head. Now on snare drums specifically, you're going to have one more part. That's called the snare strainer and the snare throw-off lever. The strainer are these metal wires that run across the bottom of the resonant head. The throw-off is the piece that's attached to the end of the snare strainer. When I turn on the throw-off, the snare strainers are attached tightly to the bottom of the resonant head. That allows them to vibrate with the head. When I turn off the lever, they're no longer touching the resonant head, and the drum vibrates freely. This allows us to have that characteristic snare drum sound by turning those on. Those are the different parts of the drums. When you're done using your drum, it's important that it gets stored properly. If I were to go buy a trumpet or a saxophone or a trombone, that instrument would come with a case. There is no reason to own a drum without owning a case that matches that drum. It'll extend the life of your drum, it'll protect the drum, it'll really prevent a lot of damage from being done to the instrument. This is a hard case with a padded interior. This is really the top end of cases. You also find hard cases without padding inside, and you'll also find bags, some padded, some not. All are perfect options for this process. All we're really looking to do is just make sure we have somewhere safe to put the drum when we're not using it. By putting a drum in a case when I'm storing it, a lot of different things are going to happen. The shell of the drum is going to stay in really good shape. I'm going to protect the drum heads, which are really the most fragile part of that instrument. And it also gives me a nice convenient handle to carry the drum by. Anytime you need to store or transport your drum, a case is really your best option. If you don't have a case for your drum, there are some other options out there. Anytime I'm going to store a drum, I want to store it flat. If I need to set a drum down, setting it up on end like this is perfectly acceptable. But if I'm going to walk away from it, having it like this, there's a good chance it might get knocked over, it might get kicked. And if we have extreme changes in humidity or temperature, this might also change the shape of the shell and of the rims because of where the pressure's at. I really want to store my drums in a flat situation as often as possible. And that's true when they're in their cases as well. We're going to put them in their case, but then we're going to leave them flat. Anytime you're getting ready to pack up your drum for storage, maybe a good option to go ahead and wipe down the drum. Wipe down the shell, wipe down the rims, the counter hoops, the lugs. Keep that drum in shiny condition so it looks good. Because ultimately, if you look good, you sound good, right? Get that drum stored properly so it's in good condition the next time you need to use it. Just like all of our instruments, when we get ready to play drums, we have to choose the proper implement to hit the instrument with. In the drum world, these are sticks. Now, in the concert percussion family, you want to choose a stick that is made entirely of wood and has a wood tip. There are sticks out there that have metal shoulders on them, and there's sticks out there that have nylon tips out there on them. Neither one of them is really an appropriate choice for the concert percussion drum section. When you find the right sticks, they may have multiple different shapes of tips. This type of stick has what we call an acorn tip. That's a little bit flatter side with a rounded top. This is really good for playing pretty loud snare drum. The next one, this is a round tip. Being rounded allows us to play at softer and medium dynamic levels and for the sound to stay consistent as we move on the drum head and change the angle of the stick. One of the last shapes you might come across is an oval tip. Oval tips are great for playing at soft dynamic levels as you get a lot of contact from the bead of the stick to the head and you don't have to do as much work in the arms. Again, you're going to want to try to avoid nylon tip sticks. These are great for playing on cymbals, but really not the sound we're looking for on a drum. These can also do damage to a concert drum head since that's generally a thinner head than you would find on, say, a marching drum, and definitely a thinner and more lightweight material than a cymbal. At all expenses, you do not want to use a marching stick on a concert drum. You can tell it's a marching stick because of how thick the shoulder and the shaft of the stick are and how heavy the stick is. These have a purpose. They are to be used on marching drums. That's an outdoor activity with heads that are made of Kevlar. There's a reason this stick is this big and it's for that type of drum. It's not for this drum with these plastic heads. So go find yourself a solid wood stick with a wood tip and you're set up to play drums in your concert percussion section. When it comes time to change the head on your drum, there's a few easy steps you're going to want to remember. The first step is to always work in small increments. So when I get ready to take the old head off, I'm going to loosen the tension rods from the counter hoop. As I do that, I'm going to work in only about half turns each time. And you'll notice I'm working back and forth across the drum. I'm not going around the drum in a circle. By doing this, and by releasing just a little bit of tension off of counter hoop from each tension rod at a time, I'm allowing the pressure to come off the head evenly. Now, taking a drum head off, you're probably not going to do much damage to the drum if you do this incorrectly, and you're definitely not going to damage the old head. You're going to discard it anyways. But it's just good practice to get into because you want to remember to do this when you're putting the new head on. This becomes very important at that point. So we're going to loosen those rods. Now that the tension is completely off the counter hoop, I can go ahead and just take the tension rods the rest of the way out. I can either use the drum key to do that, or I can just use my fingers. But I need to get those tension rods completely out of the lug casings to free the counter hoop from the drum. Once those tension rods are free, I'm going to leave them in the counter hoop and set the counter hoop aside. That's the best way to make sure I don't lose any of the pieces, because on each tension rod there are also washers. We don't want to misplace those. We're just going to leave them in the counter hoop. We're going to take our old head off the drum and we're going to discard it. It's stretched out, it may be broken. We don't have a use for this anymore. Before we put our new head on, we're actually going to do just a couple of bits of maintenance on the drum. Since the head's off, it becomes very easy now to go ahead and wipe down the inside of the shell. Make sure that there's no dust on the drum. Clean out any dirt. We also are going to wipe off the bearing edge. The bearing edge would be the highest part of the shell. That's where the drum head actually touches the shell. We want to make sure that the bearing edge is very clean and that there are no foreign objects on there. If there's a speck of dirt or anything hard on there, we might do damage to our new head. So we're going to take a chance, wipe it down, get all the dirt off there. Then we're going to grab some sort of lubricant, maybe a little Vaseline, and we're going to dip our paper towel in there and just put the thinnest layer of Vaseline on the top of that bearing edge. This is going to do a couple of different things. As the head pulls over the bearing edge, it's going to allow the head to move easier. It's also going to keep the very edge of the wood just the slightest bit moisturized and lubricated so that the plies don't separate and the wood doesn't dry out and crack. We don't want to overdo it. You shouldn't be able to feel the lubrication, the Vaseline on there. Just a very thin layer. Once that's done, we take our new head, we put it over the shell. It should fit nice and snug around the bearing edge. If you want the logo of the drum head in one particular location, go ahead and get it lined up at this point. We're going to put our counter hoop back over the drum head and go ahead and start putting our tension rods back in. At this point, the first thing I'm going to do is just get each tension rod threaded into the lug casing, just a couple of threads to make sure they're right. This also allows me to check and make sure that the counter hoop is centered on the drum and that the drum head isn't slid to one side. Once I know they're all in the right spot, I'm going to go ahead and tighten down all those tension rods using just my fingers. I don't want to put any pressure on one tension rod until they're all ready to go. So I'm only going to work with my fingers. I'm not going to use any tools for this process. Once all those tension rods are finger tight, we're going to check and make sure the counter hoop is solid, make sure the drum head's centered, and then we're going to start to bring up each tension rod just a quarter or half turn at a time. Again, working across the drum in a star or clockwork type pattern. And we're going to slowly apply tension to the drum head. Once I've applied a little bit of tension to the drum head, it'll probably produce a pitch. Now, the drum head doesn't sound great right now for a couple of different reasons. One, it's a brand new head. It hasn't seated yet on the drum. No drum is a perfect circle, or is it perfectly flat. And each head has to take time to accommodate to the shell of the drum. That's what the seating process does. That's what we're going to let the head do next. Also, it's brand new plastic. It takes a little while to really break in and wear in. As you're doing this, you may hear the plastic crack a little bit. That's not so bad. Just make sure it's not too tight. That's what's causing that plastic to crack, is the sound of it being pulled across the shell. We put a nice even amount of tension on it. The head produces a pitch. Now we're going to let the drum sit for 3 or 4 hours, maybe overnight, and let that head truly seat. And we can come back the next day and bring that head up to pitch so that we're ready to play it in the band. As we talked about in the introduction, one of the most important parts of this instrument is the frame. The frame holds the entire instrument together, it allows it to be moved easily, and it provides the rigidity to the instrument so that you can play on top of it. Unfortunately, the frame is also one of the most neglected parts of the instrument. There's a lot of parts of the frame that can come apart, they can be loosened, and when they're not maintained properly, we get ourselves in trouble. The instrument might start to rattle, it might fall apart, and the last thing you want to do is be pushing a xylophone down the hallway and have it fall on you. So we're going to talk about the different elements of the frame that are really important and really easy to maintain. The first, you'll see all over the frame, regardless of what brand of instrument, there will be lots of different hand screws. Right? The hand screws allow the frame to be adjusted, they allow it to be moved, they allow it to be taken apart. We want to make sure that at all times those hand screws are always tight. Now, we don't want to use a set of pliers or a wrench of any sort. We don't want to over tighten those hand screws. We don't want to break them. Just the weight of your hand, good firm twist on each of those hand screws. I like to do this every time I move the instrument. That way I know we're good to go, that frame is solid, and I can play the instrument properly. On almost all of these hand screws, there's going to be washers, sometimes 2. If you have 1 washer or 2 washers, you want to make sure there's always a washer in between whatever frame piece is connected and the hand screw. That'll keep the hand screw from rattling against the frame. That washer will keep that tight, keep it set to go. If you're missing washers, these are really easy to replace by going to your local hardware store, or you can order them directly from your music manufacturer. We want to go through and tighten these, like I said, every time I move that instrument. It's just good common maintenance. It'll prevent a lot of rattles, it'll prevent a lot of issues. If you do have a rattle show up though, I can almost guarantee you it's always going to be based on one of these frame screws. Go through, find it, isolate it, figure out what the issue is. Now, sometimes you may have metal rattling against metal, and that's just the nature of an older instrument. We can address that by putting a piece of paper in between the metal or a piece of mold foam, any soft material that'll kind of absorb that rattle a little bit and get your instrument back into working condition. The last part of the frame we're going to talk about, a lot of modern instruments, we now have height adjustments to allow different height students to be able to play these instruments. The height adjustment screws look just like the rest of the frame screws. All we have to do is loosen them, and then this instrument can adjust up and down to the right height. Now, one thing to be careful with height adjustment, we want to make sure that the instrument sits flat as often as possible. We don't want to put any more torque on this frame than is necessary. And the best way to prevent that is to make sure that the instrument sits flat at all 4 height adjustment points. So again, maintain your frame every time you move the instrument. That's great preventative maintenance, and your instrument will be in working condition a whole lot longer. Just like every instrument in the percussion family, when we're done using our hardware, we need to store it properly so that it's still in good condition the next time we need it. There are 2 ways to store hardware. You can either store hardware in a vertical position, like so, or you can store it in a flat position. Either one is fine, neither is better. There are some things to think about with both of them though. If your hardware is going to be stored vertically, you want to be very careful that you don't have multiple pieces of hardware banging against each other coming in and out of storage. The last thing you want to do is break off a hand screw or dent a piece of hardware so that it no longer functions the proper way. You really need to consider the same thing when you're storing hardware flat as well. As much as it may seem harmless to stack hardware on top of each other, it gets pretty heavy and you can do a lot of damage to the hardware if you're not careful with how you store it and how you remove it. The best thing to think about, the best way to handle this is to store it either vertically or horizontally, but to store it in its own individual place. I like to use about 6-inch PVC tubes laid flat and stacked up in a cabinet so that each stand has a slot it can slide right into. That keeps them all very safe, it keeps them all in the same location, and they're all easy to find and you know where they're coming from next. Whether you choose to store them flat or upright doesn't matter. You'll also occasionally have to move stands from one location to another. I highly recommend either get yourself a hard-sided hardware case or a bag I've seen people go to the thrift store and buy an old golf bag and be able to put stands down in a golf bag to haul a couple of cymbal stands to a gig. Doesn't matter how you do it, but you definitely don't want to transport these stands out on their own. Right? Put them in a case, maybe wrap them in a blanket to protect them. That way when you get to wherever you're going, your hardware is still in good functioning condition and you're ready to play the show. There's different types of stands and hardware for all the different percussion instruments in the family. From the boom stand for cymbals to the straight stand for cymbals and even a snare drum stand, you're also going to come across stands that are made just for holding cowbells or temple blocks or wood blocks or some of the other accessory instruments. There's specialty stands out there for all the different types of instruments, and it's important to have high quality functioning stands for each instrument you may have to play. There's some basic maintenance tips that are good for all of the stands regardless of what instrument they were meant for. The first of which is regarding the hand screws. You want to make sure that the hand screws are never over tightened. If I over tighten my hand screws, I can bend the metal. If I bend the metal in this tube, the stand may no longer be able to height adjust properly. I also don't want to lose anything. All of the screws on that stand serve a purpose. If you're unscrewing a screw and it falls out, make sure you put it back where it came from immediately so that you're never missing anything. Lastly, if you've inherited some stands that are missing pieces, go ahead and get those replaced and fixed right away. It's very easy to buy felts, washers, hand screws, the different adjustment pieces. You can order those from any music dealer. Get your stands and your different hardware in solid working condition so that your instruments can be held properly so that you can always make the best quality sound on your percussion instruments. In order to be an effective cymbal player, you need high quality hardware to help you out as well. The suspended cymbal has to sit on one of three types of stands. The first is what we call a straight stand. That's a stand that from the base all the way to the top of the stand is just one vertical post with some height adjustment built in. The next is what we call a boom stand. A boom stand is the same bottom as a straight stand, but then at the top there's a mechanism called a boom tilter, which allows us to rotate this part and extend this part to be able to put a cymbal wherever it'll sound best. The third type of suspended cymbal stand you might come across is called a gooseneck stand. A gooseneck would be the same base, and then there would be this neck that would come out and around that you'd be able to hang a cymbal from. That's a way to be able to hang a Piatti cymbal as a suspended cymbal. We're going to focus right now on just the straight stand and the boom stand. When I get ready to put my cymbal on the stand, I want to make sure the base of the stand is tightened down and the stand is ready to hold the weight of the cymbal. I'm going to put that cymbal right on top of that peg, being careful not to jam that metal into the bottom of the cymbal. I'm going to put the felts and the washers and the screw back on. I want to make sure that my cymbal is perfectly flat. When I use suspended cymbal, I don't want it to be tilted. I don't want it to be low. I don't want it to be too high. I want it to be flat. And I want it to be about the height of my belly button. That's going to be the best place for me to get the best projection out to the ensemble and out to the audience. That's really what we're looking for, is how to create the best quality sound on these instruments. Now, these instruments are really loud. You may want to consider wearing earplugs or some other type of hearing protection when you're playing them. In addition, the people sitting right in front of you may want to consider wearing some hearing protection as well. Now, on these stands, there are some very important parts. Let's look at the top of this stand really quick. And these same parts will exist on the top of every cymbal stand. There's the actual screw, that's part of the stand. Then you will always have a plastic or a metal washer that sits on top of the screw. Now, I use plastic washers because they have this plastic sleeve built into them also, and the cymbal sits around that sleeve. That prevents the cymbal from touching the metal screw on the stand. That's really important. If the metal of the cymbal touches the metal of the stand, we can do a lot of damage to the instrument. So I use these plastic sleeves to prevent that. There are also individual rubber sleeves you can put over the metal part of the stand to avoid that contact. Next, we have a felt washer that goes underneath the cymbal. Then we would put our cymbal in place. We put another felt washer over the top of the cymbal. And then lastly, we put a hand screw on top just to hold the whole thing together. Right? Those are very important pieces to these stands. If your stands are missing washers or felts or hand screws, I highly recommend that you get them replaced quickly so that you can avoid doing damage to your instruments. Now, we talked about how the cymbal touching the metal screw of the stand can do damage to the cymbal. what happens is an event called keyholing. Now a keyholed cymbal, you can tell this cymbal has touched the metal of this stand before. It starts to crack the cymbal and it starts to change the shape of the center. Once this has happened, this cymbal will never sound the way it was intended to sound. Now, we were able to convert this cymbal into a special effects cymbal, so we still have a use for it, but you want to at all point avoid that keyhole, and we do that by making sure the metal doesn't touch the stand. If you're playing crash cymbals or piatti, you want to find a cradle for those cymbals. Lots of different manufacturers make different types of cradles, but this is just a way to hold the cymbals at a good height so that you can walk up to them, grab them, play them, and not have to hold them any longer than when you need them. They get heavy after a while. If you don't have a cymbal cradle to use, you can also use a table with a towel on top of it, or any other flat surface with a soft top so that you don't do any damage to the cymbals and so that you don't make any noise picking them up or putting them down. Get yourself some good hardware like a piatti cradle, a boom stand, or a straight stand, and you'll be set up ready to go. At some point, you're going to have to replace the heads on timpani. Just playing them will wear them out over time. Also, occasionally you may have a puncture in the head or a cut in the head. Any of those instances would be a time to go ahead and replace the timpani head. Now, replacing timpani heads is a really tough operation, something you don't want to do if you are not experienced at doing it. The first step you want to do, though, in order to change your timpani heads is to order the right timpani heads. Now, there are two different types of timpani. The first is called a standard collar timpani. The second is called an extended collar timpani. This is an example of an extended collar timpani, and what I mean by that is, if you look right here, where the head rests on the bearing edge, which is the top of the copper bowl, from where the head goes over the bearing edge, under the counter hoop, there's actually an extra inch of space. That's called the extended collar. If this was a standard collar timpani, the head would go over the bearing edge, and then the counter hoop would sit right up against the bearing edge. There would not be any space between the bearing edge and the counter hoop. It's really important to know whether your drums are extended collar or standard collar timpani. If they're extended collar timpani, you actually need to order heads that are 2 inches bigger than the size of the drum. For instance, this is a 26-inch drum, but it uses 28-inch heads because the head extends 1 inch over the bearing edge on each side of the drum head. 26 plus 1 plus 1 equals 28 for a head diameter. If you're not sure exactly what size of heads you need, you can take the head off and you can measure it. If I take a head, put it upside down, and measure from the outside of the flesh hoop to the outside of the flesh hoop, whatever number I come up with across the diameter of the drum on the outside of those hoops is the diameter of the head. Now, head diameters for timpani will almost always be in full numbers. So in this instance, I need a 28-inch head to put on this 26-inch drum. If you're in doubt, call a local percussion professional and have them come help you out with choosing which heads to put on your timpani when it's time to replace them. Now that I know what size of head I need, I can choose what type of head to buy. There are different materials that heads are made out of. There's also different finishes. So this is a plastic head with a translucent finish. I can get a plastic head with a translucent finish, an opaque finish, or a clear plastic head. Any of those three is a fine choice. They all have different sounds and they all are just slightly different for different settings. Almost every head made for timpani now is made of plastic. Originally, timpani heads would have been made of animal skin. Some professional players still choose to play on natural animal skin heads. But for the average school-age percussionist, animal skin is a little too fragile and very expensive. So we choose a nice plastic head, translucent, opaque, or clear, set them up on our drums, and we have a nice, updated, new set of timpani to work with. The mallet percussion family breaks down into two subfamilies. The first of those that we're going to talk about today are the instruments that are made of wood or a synthetic type of wood, maybe Keelon or Koostalon or Paduk. This is a rosewood xylophone. The bars are made of rosewood, but we could have this exact same instrument made out of one of those synthetic materials as well. The xylophone is a high register instrument. If we were to compare it to the piano, this would be very similar to the very top end of the piano keyboard. The xylophone's recognizable because it has resonators, but they're very short. They're very close to the instrument. The second instrument in the wood or synthetic family is the marimba. The marimba is a much larger instrument than the xylophone. It's recognizable because its bars are much wider and the resonators are much longer, sometimes extending all the way to the floor. The marimba is used to cover the middle frequencies and the lower frequencies in the sound spectrum. Between the two of them, the marimba and the xylophone, we can cover an entire range of sound. We can play all the low sounds, the middle sounds, and the high sounds. The xylophone and the marimba make up the two instruments in the wood or the synthetic portion of the mallet family. The second subfamily of the mallet instrument family are the instruments that are made of metal. There are 4 instruments that fit into this family. The first of those instruments is the orchestra bells or the glockenspiel. Now, the orchestra bells and glockenspiel are technically 2 different instruments, but at this point, especially in American music, those 2 instruments have really kind of melded into one. This is a set of orchestra bells, or if you have a part that says glockenspiel, this is the instrument you're looking for. It's very high in pitch, generally has no resonators, and the bars are made of a metal, generally aluminum or steel. The second instrument in this family is very similar in frequency to the bells, are called crotales. Crotales, again, are a very high-pitched metal instrument. They're little round discs mounted in the same order as a keyboard instrument. Crotales generally are tuned a little different than orchestra bells, which is why they're desired by some composers as they produce some different overtones. The next instrument in the family are called the chimes. Chimes are very recognizable because they are hung vertically. They're also sometimes known as tubular bells. Chimes are unique from the rest of the instruments in this family in that the note and the resonator are built into one. So you have a long tube, you hit the top of it, which is the note or the bar, as we learned about in the first lesson, and then the entire resonator vibrates as part of that strike. The last instrument in the metal family is known as the vibraphone. The vibraphone's recognizable because it has a pedal attached to it. It's laid out very similar to a xylophone or a marimba. The bars are going to be made of a metal, either gold or silver in color, and then the pedal will be attached to a dampener bar that allows you to dampen and undampen the bars to let them ring. Lastly, the vibraphone generally will have a motor attached to it that creates false vibrato, hence the name vibraphone. These are the instruments of the metal family in the mallet percussion world. Let's talk about the different types of mallets that are best used on each of the instruments we discussed. I like to have what I call my basic set of mallets, my extended series of mallets, and then even just some special effects mallets. Most percussionists you'll know have lots of mallets. This is to give you lots of different options on the instrument. After all, the xylophone sounds like a xylophone every single time, so to be able to adjust the tone quality or adjust the sound, we have to change our mallet choice. So let's talk about some basic mallets that we may use. For the marimba, I really like a mallet with an oval head to it that's covered in yarn. This is a great basic starting mallet. Again, something oval in shape with a yarn top on it. For xylophone, my default mallet is a medium rubber mallet. Again, a round head made of rubber. For the vibraphone, this is a material called cord, very similar to yarn, but a little bit harder. And you'll notice, compared to our oval marimba mallets, our vibraphone mallets are a little bit more acorn in shape. Acorn-shaped cord mallets are a great choice for vibraphone. For chimes, a good hammer to start with is a rawhide hammer. Again, just rawhide wrapped tightly in a coil on top of a wooden handle. And then for bells and glockenspiel and crotales, I start with just a good medium plastic mallet. It's a round head made of a good plastic. It gives me great tone on all the instruments. Not too loud, not too harsh, but a good starting point. And those are the basic mallets I use for the 5 different instruments. As many choices as there are on the mallet instruments, there are a couple of mallets we have to be really careful to completely avoid on the various mallet instruments. For instance, these metal and these plastic mallets sound great on bells, sound great on crotales, but those are the only instruments they should ever be used on. We have to be really careful to avoid using really hard mallets on marimbas, xylophones, vibraphones, and chimes. These types of mallets will do damage to those instruments. They are really invented just for orchestra bells and glockenspiel. Same thing with our chime hammers. We want to only use our chime hammers on chimes. There's no reason to ever play a xylophone with a chime hammer. If you keep those things in mind, you use the mallets that were developed for the instruments, you're always going to have a good sound and you'll always be successful in the percussion section. Sometimes the basic series of mallets isn't enough for our instruments. Sometimes we need softer sounds, or we need more articulate sounds, or we need louder, or we need quieter. Each of the instruments has a wide variety of mallets that work on it. For instance, on marimba, in addition to your standard oval yarn mallets, you may have varying degrees of yarn. These are very soft yarn mallets that would allow me to play quieter. They also allow you to play in the lower range of the instrument without doing any damage to the bars. Meanwhile, these are oval hard yarn mallets, still covered in yarn, but much tighter wrap and much less yarn, which allows the instrument to articulate very well at the top end of the instrument. Sometimes it's necessary to play with rubber mallets on marimba as well. It gives it a little bit more of a xylophone characteristic sound, but in the range of a marimba. On xylophone, occasionally we'll need to play with yarn mallets or cord mallets. A really hard marimba mallet or a really hard vibraphone mallet sounds great on xylophone for a softer set. In addition, on xylophone, we may use some soft plastic mallets instead of our rubber mallets, and sometimes we may even use mallets made of wood. The sound of wood on a natural wood xylophone is actually a really nice sound, something that a lot of composers really like. In the vibraphone world, you'll notice almost everything in the vibraphone stick bag is still acorn in shape, but sometimes it's covered in yarn versus cord, and then might have less yarn or more yarn, less cord or more cord, to be able to allow different sounds to come out of the instrument. On chimes, in addition to our rawhide hammers, it's also acceptable to play with plastic hammers and sometimes even with wood hammers. Each one's going to have a slightly different sound, and it's all about what does the conductor want, what do you as a musician think sounds best. And then on glockenspiel, bells, crotales, we can also play with really hard plastic compared to our medium plastic. And sometimes we'll also play with metal mallets. These are made of brass. They'll give us a really brilliant shimmer on top of the entire ensemble, which is sometimes the sound we're looking for. Now, especially in the 21st century music scene, composers are asking for a lot of extended techniques. They may ask for you to rake a bells mallet across the chimes, or they may ask for you to play vibraphone using a rubber mallet. Okay? All of these things are acceptable, but always remember, you are playing an instrument. Please have the instrument's best interest in mind at all times, and always try things out at a very soft dynamic level before you jump in. Make sure you know whether or not you're going to do any damage to the instrument before you try out some of those new techniques. So again, these are some of the mallets I use in an extension to my basic set. There are all kinds of mallets out there. Every single one of them has a different sound, every single one of them has a different use, and really the only way to know which ones sound best is to play them and figure out what do you like as a performer, what does the conductor like, what is the sound you're really looking for. When I play suspended cymbal, I have to make some choices about what mallets to use or what sticks to use to get the right sound out of the cymbal. Just like all the other instruments we've talked about, suspended cymbal also has varying degrees of sound, different timbres, different articulations, and they're all adjusted by which mallets we use. A good starting point for suspended cymbal is just a nice medium yarn mallet. This can come out of your marimba stick bag. It produces just this nice, good, washy sound on this cymbal. We want to be careful when we're choosing yarn mallets. We don't want to choose something that's too soft. A lot of us want to try to use something soft. It's a cymbal. We don't want to do any damage to it. But when you use soft mallets, we just don't get as much sound out of the cymbal right away. It's a little bit more of a lower frequency. And from the outside of the ensemble, we just don't hear what we need to out of the suspended cymbal. So we like to avoid these softer mallets. Similarly, we also do not want to choose too hard of a mallet, or else we're going to hear too much articulation on the cymbal. Right? We want to hear the wash of the cymbal, not every single stroke on the cymbal. So that's why we're going to choose more of a medium weight yarn mallet. Now, in addition to yarn mallets, sometimes we may need to use other sounds. It's not uncommon to have to use a wire brush on a cymbal, or a stick. And sometimes you may even need to use like a rubber mallet to really get the cymbal to speak over the entire ensemble. Whichever mallet you choose, make sure you step up to that suspended cymbal, put it in the right place, and play it proudly. We're going to talk about some just basic preventative maintenance on how to keep your instrument in tip-top shape and keep your mallets there as well. Let's go ahead and start with the mallets. You want to make sure with any mallet that's wrapped in a yarn or a cord or a felt, you don't want to touch the top of that mallet with your fingertips. The oils that are in your hand will start to deteriorate the fabric in the mallet, and the yarn will start to fray and it'll fall off the mallet head eventually. Same with felt timpani mallets or cord vibraphone mallets, as these are. You want to just avoid touching those at all costs. In addition, when you're storing the mallets, the best place to store a mallet is just in a stick bag. You can find a nice cheap stick bag, put those mallets in there, it'll protect them, it'll keep you from having to touch them. One thing we want to avoid, and one thing you see a lot, is people who, when they're not playing, they just stick the mallet down between the bars. Right? It looks like a nice, easy storage solution, but we want to avoid that for a couple of different reasons. The first of which being, it's really easy to break mallets when they're stored like this. Sometimes you come up and you grab a mallet, and as you're pulling it out, you bend it one way or another, and that's doing damage to the instrument. It also could very easily break the shaft of the mallet. You'll also notice, in order to do that, I had to grab the head of the mallet, which is something we just talked about we want to avoid. If you do have to set the mallets down, just lay them flat on the instrument. They're not going to go anywhere. There's no need to store them between the bars like that. Now, in addition to not touching the heads of the mallets, we also want to avoid touching the actual instrument. Remember, the keys and the bars, or the keys or the bars, as we call them, are the instrument. That's what's making the sound. That is the bulk of this instrument. We want to avoid putting our fingertips on for the same reason we want to avoid touching the mallets. The oils in our fingertips can deteriorate the lacquer on the bars. Now, it's impossible to never touch the bars. You'll notice when we changed the bar cord, we had to touch the bars. When you move the instrument, sometimes you have to touch the bars. If you do, no big deal, just go ahead and wipe them off right away. I like to just use a nice clean cloth. When you're working with bars, you never use any sort of liquid cleaner. Just a nice clean cloth, and go ahead and clean off that bar. Get any of your oil from your fingertips off the bar so that the wood will last a long time. Now the rest of the instrument, the frame, it's made of metal, it's quite a bit more durable. If you need to clean the frame, just take a nice clean cloth, any sort of cloth will work, and even a general purpose cleaner, and we just wipe down the rails, wipe down the frame, keep the dust off it. You know, a clean instrument's a happy instrument. So we take care of the instrument, we take care of the mallets, and we're good to go for quite a while. The last thing we need to talk about with our mallet family is how to properly move the instrument. The nature of being a percussionist is that you're going to have to move instruments at some point. Mallet instruments, although they're big, although they're easy to roll around, they sometimes can be extremely fragile. So if we need to move the instrument further than just to the music room or to the auditorium, we're going to want to go ahead and disassemble some parts of that instrument to make sure that we don't do any damage to the instrument. Now you'll notice I've already removed one set of bars. Anytime you need to move the instrument a good amount, we're going to want to go ahead and remove the bars, and we want to wrap the bars. Now, I'm going to use a bar wrap that came from the manufacturer of this xylophone, but you don't have to have this bar wrap. You can do this with a blanket, you can do it with a sheet, even the dust cover of the instrument makes a great bar wrap. What we're trying to do is make sure that the bars get rolled so that none of them touch each other. It allows them to be safely transported and not do any damage to the instrument. Now you'll notice I've taken the springs from that end of our bar cord and I've put them outside of our wraps so that when I wrap up the bars, the springs don't scratch the wood and don't do any damage to the instrument. Once that's set up to go, I'm going to cover up the first couple of bars to make sure they don't rub against each other either, and then I'm just going to roll this tightly like this. Keep the springs outside the bar wraps. And we get to the end, these ones have buckles on them. I can buckle them in place. If you're using a blanket, just wrap it up and you're good to go. Your bars are set up, you're ready to move on to the next step. Now the rest of the instrument at this point can either be transported whole or can be broken down. If you need to break down your instrument, you're going to have to remove the resonators. Resonators are meant to come out of the frame of the instrument, and each brand is a little different, but in some way the resonator set will come out of that instrument frame. Now remember, the resonators are fragile as well, so wherever you transport the resonators, you may want to wrap them in a blanket or put them in another part of the vehicle so that they don't get banged around by the frame. Once you remove the resonators, the bars, the rest of the frame will either just come apart or it may even fold up. A lot of times you just remove the spanner bar and the legs will fold right up underneath the rest of the instrument. Again, make sure while you're transporting that instrument, the resonators, the bars, the pieces of the frame, they're isolated from each other, either using blankets, cardboard, something of the sort, just to make sure that they don't scratch each other, don't run into each other, don't do any damage to these parts of the instruments. Once you get the instrument to location, it's just the opposite setup to be able to build the instrument. Put the frame back together first, make sure the frame is solid. Then you're going to go ahead and reattach the resonators, and then you can go ahead and put the bars back on. Now, once we are using the instrument in its built fashion, we're still going to have to move the instrument, I guarantee it. We're going to have to roll it around, we may have to lift it. We want to be really careful when we're doing that. When the instrument is built, it's very easy to do damage to the instrument with simple things like rolling it too hard over a threshold or over a transition from carpet onto a hard surface floor. Also, when we try to lift the instrument, it's very easy to do damage. When we lift the instrument, we want to make sure we lift from the end cap of the instrument, not from the rail. On marimbas especially, but on all mallet instruments, the rails generally are not attached to the end caps using anything but gravity. If we lift from the rails, we're going to pull that instrument straight apart. So we want to lift from the end cap. That's where the frame is held together the tightest. We roll the instrument to where we need to go, we're set up, and we're ready to make some music. We've talked a lot about how to take care of the instrument while you're using it and how to get it ready to play. But one of the most important things with our mallet instruments is how to store them properly. With instruments this size, it's really important that we take care to store them in a fashion that they'll maintain their structure and we won't do damage to them faster than necessary. The first thing we're going to talk about with mallet instruments, something that you should use for every mallet instrument you own, is to find some sort of dust cover for the instrument. Now, if you buy the instrument from a manufacturer, it'll come with a dust cover. If your instruments have lost their dust covers or you've inherited an instrument that didn't have one, it's easy. Go get a blanket, go get an old piano cover. You could talk to your family and consumer sciences department and have them make you one. Maybe you have a band mom who can help you out as well. But find some way to cover that instrument to keep dust off of it when we're not using it. This is probably the most important storage technique we need to be aware of with our instruments. The next thing we have to be really careful of when we're storing our instruments is to make sure that they don't get used as tables. They're flat instruments, they kind of look like tables, especially to some of those instrumentalists who aren't used to using them. We can easily prevent that. The best way is to make sure that we practice good technique by not stacking anything on top of the instrument ever. The next best way is just make sure, put some simple sign on top of it, letting people know, hey, this is an instrument, not a table. If you just tape that to that dust cover, set that on top of there, that should be enough to keep people from stacking things on there. If you have a place that you can store this instrument underneath a shelf, that'll even go the next step to helping out with that process. Lastly, when we store this instrument, we want to take extra care to make sure that nothing is able to get run into the resonator pipes. You know, those are very important to the sound of the instrument, and if they get dented or bent, it could change the sound of the instrument. Not to mention, if we scratch the paint on them, they just don't look as good. So take very special care to make sure your resonators and your instrument are in good shape, and that instrument will last you a whole lot longer. One of the most common problems that occurs with balanced action timpani is that the pedal tension is incorrect. You'll know your pedal tension is wrong if you try to move the pedal, and when you let your foot off the pedal moves back to a different location. In this case, I'm trying to move the heel of the pedal down, and when I take my foot off the pedal, the toe instantly returns back to its location. That shows me that the pedal has too much tension and needs adjusted. Now remember, when you're adjusting pedal tension, just like head tension, we're dealing with a balanced drum. So adjusting my pedal tension will also affect my head, And it's really important that I'm aware of that and I work in small increments so that I don't do damage to the instrument or come across any unintended consequences. So again, in this instance, the pedal has too much tension. I know that because the toe of the pedal is moving forward. The pitch is coming back up. To adjust this, I just put my hand right here on this tension screw and I remove some tension by turning counterclockwise. Again, I'm going to move in small increments. That was maybe 3 quarter turns. I'll check the pedal, and I'll know the pedal is in the right tension when I can move the pedal to a location, take my foot off, and the pedal stays there. Now, we knew the pedal had too much tension because when we pushed the heel down, the toe rebounded the other way. If your pedal doesn't have enough tension, you'll take your foot off and the heel will snap back to the ground. If either of those things is occurring, if the toe's going forward on its own or the heel's coming down on its own, all you need to do is adjust your pedal tension. Grab that hand screw, make small adjustments until the pedal stays placed on its own. By adjusting this tension screw, what we're really doing is adjusting the tension on the spring that's underneath this casing. I turn that screw tighter, I make the spring tighter. I turn the screw looser, I loosen the pressure on the spring. That spring directly impacts the balance of this pedal. So we get our pedal in balance with our head by turning that screw so that the pedal will stay where we want it to stay, and then we're ready to play timpani. The nature of these instruments, unfortunately, is sometimes this chord we talked about earlier, the bar chord, breaks. It happens. When you play on the instrument for a long time, it's going to start to fall apart, it'll deteriorate, and eventually it'll just break. Unfortunately, bar chord cannot be repaired. It just has to be replaced. So to replace bar chord, you really have 2 options. You can go to your music store and you can buy replacement bar chord. You can also go to an outdoor retailer and buy paracord or parachute cord. As long as you have the right firmness and elasticity to it, it'll work just fine as well. So to replace the bar chord on the instrument, the first thing we actually need to do is remove the old bar chord. It's one piece of cord that goes around the entire upper manual or lower manual. So all we're going to do is we're just going to pull that bar cord out back here by the springs. All right. We're going to take the spring off the old cord because we're going to use that spring again. We're going to set it aside somewhere. We're going to pull out the rest of this cord. And this can be done either on the instrument or at a table, on the floor. It doesn't really matter. Okay, we're going to set those springs aside. Don't lose those springs. They're very important to that instrument. And then your new bar chord, if you're buying true bar chord, the end of it will already be waxed so that it's easy to thread through the instrument. If you're buying paracord, you're probably going to have to cut it. You'll have to put some tape or something around the cord to make sure that it'll be easy to thread through the instrument. Each of these bars has these little holes drilled in it at the nodes, right? And that cord needs to thread straight through those bars. So we're going to take a couple of seconds and go ahead and thread the cord through these bars so that we can finish up this process. Now you'll notice as I finish, there's quite a bit of excess bar cord left over. The reason for that is all bar cord is cut to the same length. They make it so that you can replace bar chords on 5-octave marimbas with this. So since I'm replacing a xylophone bar chord, I'm going to have a lot of cord left over. We're going to show you what to do with that in just a second. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and center all of this bar chord back on the saddles. I want the instrument put back together before I finalize this so that I know I have the right amount of bar chord before I make that final cut. And get the instrument put back together. So I'm going to make sure that that bar chord is pulled tight through those bars. Remember when we talked about earlier, the bars float off the frame because of the tension of the bar cord sitting on top of the saddles. So we need to make sure we have the right amount of tension in the cord before we put those springs back on. So now that I know the bar cord is tight and the bars are in the right location, now we're going to go ahead and put those springs back on. We're going to put those springs in a safe location so that we had them again for this process. Your spring has probably got one end that has an open hook on it and another end that's closed. We're going to feed the bar cord through the closed end of the spring so that the opened end, the hook end, is facing out from the bar cord. And we're going to do that with both of these. that open hook on that spring, the two springs are going to connect to each other using that hook. So we're going to slide the bar cord down pretty far towards the end because ultimately we're going to connect those two springs right there in the middle. Okay? Now, to get the bar cord to be exactly the right length, we've got to figure out about where that spring goes. I'm going to back that spring back. I know it's about there at the end. And I'm going to just tie a knot in this bar cord. By tying just a simple knot right there in the bar cord, now that spring will hold in place on the bar cord. All right, do the same thing on this side. Okay, so now both my springs have a stop point on the bar cord. All right, assuming that stop point's in the right spot, I connect those springs. They give me enough tension to create the tension on the instrument. All right, that tells us we're holding the bars up above the frame. We're going to get really good resonance out of the bars. Okay, so now that we know we have good tension between these two springs, I'm safe to get rid of my excess bar cord. We don't want to leave this just hanging on the instrument. It's serving us no purpose. We're going to get rid of it. So find a pair of scissors, right? And we're just going to trim that bar cord just right back here to the end of the spring, basically, on both pieces. Because the bar cord is made of cotton and nylon, that cord is going to fray if we leave it like that. So you want to do something to keep that cord from fraying. There are a couple different options. You can either burn the end of the cord, which will keep it from fraying. You can wrap some tape around it. You can dip it in some super glue. Lots of different options. I prefer to just take a little bit of a flame and just burn the end of that cord. Just melts the nylon right in place, which will keep that cord from fraying. Do that on both ends. All right. Reattach our springs together, and we're set to go. That instrument's good as new, and we're ready to get back to the band and making music again. So when I'm playing hand cymbals or piatti, it's important that the cymbal can vibrate the same way that the suspended cymbal did by sitting on top of the cymbal stand. To make sure a hand cymbal can vibrate, we attach a strap to that cymbal. This is just called a cymbal strap. Now there are a couple different types of cymbal straps out there. A lot of them are just made of leather. They're just a simple piece of leather with some cuts at each end to be able to tie a knot underneath the cymbal. If you're going to use leather straps on your cymbals, I highly recommend flip that leather inside out so that the rougher side of the leather is out. It's easier to grab onto, and then if your hands sweat a little bit, the leather doesn't get slippery. The other side tends to slip a little bit in your hands. The other type of cymbal strap looks the same at this end. There are 4 laces that go through the cymbal. And then on this end, there's some sort of handle that makes it a little bit easier to hold on to the cymbal. I really like these types of straps. They feel really comfortable in my hands and really give me the most control over my cymbals. Now, at some point, your cymbal straps are going to come untied, they're going to fall out, or you're just going to need to replace them. Knowing how to tie a cymbal knot is very important for a percussionist. To do that, we're going to take our cymbal strap, we're going to flip our cymbal upside down, and we're going to push all 4 of those straps through the hole in the middle of the cymbal. And we're just going to pull them out the other side. Now, once they're there, we're going to lay that cymbal flat. With the straps through the cymbal, we're going to spread them out so that they're facing 4 different directions. And we're going to work counterclockwise around the straps. Basically what we're going to do with every single one of them is fold it over so it's that shape, and we're going to feed the next strap through that loop. So we'll start by folding that. We'll call that strap number 1. Strap number 2 will fold over the top of strap number 1. Strap number 3 goes over the top of number 2. And then our last strap, strap number 4, is going to go over the 3rd one and through the loop on the 1st one. Now loosely, that's what that knot looks like. We have all 4 straps looped over another strap and tucked under a different strap. Now, you may not be able to do this on your own. You may need some help. We need to tighten all 4 of these straps. The best way to do that is have 4 hands pull on all 4 straps at the exact same time. If you can't do that, if you don't have someone to help you out, you can put a finger right in the middle of that knot and just pull each of those straps tight around that knot. All right, we're going to work it a few different times. Remember, we don't want these things to fall. They're going to be incredibly loud when they hit the ground. We're going to tighten up that knot. Then I'm going to grab the cymbal I'm going to grab onto the strap, and I'm just going to pull against the back of the strap while putting my thumb against the cymbal, just kind of anchor that knot in place and make sure it's really tight. A cymbal knot is a very specific type of knot. We don't want to use any other type of knot. We want to use a cymbal knot underneath these piotti when we're tying them. Once you've folded those straps over and tested the tightness of that knot by pulling here and pulling on the back side, you really should be good to go. There's a common myth that you have to put a penny or a washer inside this knot to keep the knot from pulling through the cymbals. If you're using high quality straps, that's not the case. A lot of people would have done that when they were using old straps that had worn out and gotten thin, or they were using cymbals that had keyholed around the center. It was a way to make the straps thicker and not pull through. With a high quality cymbal, a high quality strap, that knot we just tied will really be enough to set you up. One of the other most exciting instruments to play in the percussion section is the tambourine. There's so many different sounds you can create with this instrument, and it's a very visual instrument when you play it correctly. The first choice you have to make when choosing a tambourine is whether your tambourine should have a head on it or whether it should not. Most schools probably own a tambourine that looks like this. Most of the time in your band or orchestra setting, this is not the instrument the composer had in mind. This is very much for a rock band or a pop ensemble. If you're playing in the band or the orchestra, you want to find a tambourine with a head on it. The difference is, on this instrument, I'm going to hear the metal sound from the jingles, but I'm also going to hear the sound from the head of the drum. On this instrument, I'm only going to hear the sound on the metal of the jingles. In addition, these instruments are made with plastic and a cheaper type of metal because they're meant to be consumable and affordable. A high-quality headed tambourine is a fairly expensive instrument, but it's meant to sound like it. Once I've chosen that I want to use a headed tambourine, now I can choose which style of tambourine I want to use. You'll notice when looking at these tambourines, they all have jingles and they all have heads. But some of them have 2 rows of jingles, some of them only have 1. This instrument is smaller. This one's a little bit bigger. This one, the jingles are made out of a different material than this one. Each one of them produces a different sound. None of them are the right answer, and none of them are the wrong answer. They're all equally good tambourines, and they all will sound great in different settings. What's important for you to remember is that you need to try multiple options out and choose the one that sounds best. Occasionally when working with tambourine, the head may break. This is a head just like a drum head, just like a timpani head. It's made of plastic. It might eventually break or come detached from the frame. If you have a tambourine head break, it is possible to replace them, but it's a pretty time-intensive job. You're going to want to find someone who has done it before and who knows what they're doing to help you out with this process. Go grab yourself a tambourine and let's get started. Because your timpani will probably live in the classroom, it's really important that we store them correctly when we're not using them. The first thing we want to take care of when storing our timpani is to find some way to protect the head. Now when you purchase timpani, odds are they come with a disc like this. This disc is made to put on top of the head and protect the head from impact, puncture, things like that. If your timpani did not come with this disc or you just have misplaced them, these are really easy to recreate. You can do it by taking a large piece of cardboard and cutting out a circle that's about the same size as the head. You could also do it with a piece of plywood, right? Anything that can sit flat on top of the drum and protect that head to keep it safe. That's really the most expensive part of the drum and the most fragile part of the drum. Now that we have the head safely protected, we're going to go ahead and drop a dust cover over the entire instrument. The dust cover will obviously keep dirt and debris off the instrument. It'll also protect the tuning gauge a little bit and protect the tops of the struts. Some dust covers are short like this one. Other dust covers go all the way to the ground. Either one is a perfectly acceptable design. Now, the instrument is going to be stored in the back of your room most likely, and it's a giant table-looking device. We need to make sure we don't ever store anything on top of instruments. We know that. We need to help other people understand that as well. So we're going to just place a very simple sign on top of the timpani. Not a table. Please don't store anything on top of this instrument. I also like to include some instructions about the pedal in these signs. We're going to tape that right to the top of the cover, and you can actually leave that permanently affixed to the cover and you're good to go. Now we're going to take that pedal and we're going to make sure that the pedal is at the midpoint in its tension. Not all the way to the top, not all the way to the bottom. If we're right in the middle, we keep the head from stretching out, which would occur if we are all the way in our tight tension position. And we also keep the head from shifting, which is possible if the pedal's loose. By putting the pedal right in the middle, we're holding the head nicely in place, and then we know our timpani is stored safely, and it'll be good to go until the next time we need it. Because your timpani will probably live in the classroom, it's really important that we store them correctly when we're not using them. The first thing we want to take care of when storing our timpani is to find some way to protect the head. Now when you purchase timpani, odds are they come with a disc like this. This disc is made to put on top of the head and protect the head from impact, puncture, things like that. If your timpani did not come with this disc or you just have misplaced them, these are really easy to recreate. You can do it by taking a large piece of cardboard and cutting out a circle that's about the same size as the head. You could also do it with a piece of plywood, right? Anything that can sit flat on top of the drum and protect that head to keep it safe. That's really the most expensive part of the drum and the most fragile part of the drum. Now that we have the head safely protected, we're going to go ahead and drop a dust cover over the entire instrument. The dust cover will obviously keep dirt and debris off the instrument. It'll also protect the tuning gauge a little bit and protect the tops of the struts. Some dust covers are short like this one. Other dust covers go all the way to the ground. Either one is a perfectly acceptable design. Now, the instrument is going to be stored in the back of your room most likely, and it's a giant table-looking device. We need to make sure we don't ever store anything on top of instruments. We know that. We need to help other people understand that as well. So we're going to just place a very simple sign on top of the timpani. Not a table. Please don't store anything on top of this instrument. I also like to include some instructions about the pedal in these signs. We're going to tape that right to the top of the cover, and you can actually leave that permanently affixed to the cover and you're good to go. Now we're going to take that pedal and we're going to make sure that the pedal is at the midpoint in its tension. Not all the way to the top, not all the way to the bottom. If we're right in the middle, we keep the head from stretching out, which would occur if we are all the way in our tight tension position. And we also keep the head from shifting, which is possible if the pedal's loose. By putting the pedal right in the middle, we're holding the head nicely in place, and then we know our timpani is stored safely, and it'll be good to go until the next time we need it. Just like with every other percussion instrument, there's different types of mallets available to play timpani. The different mallet heads and shaft types will change the sound coming out of the drum. Different types of things you may see on the heads of mallets. You may see a really soft felt. This allows us to play the drum and really get a nice warm sound out of the drum. We may see a more medium felt with a hard core. That still gives us a soft sound, but a little bit harder attack. We may see a really hard felt mallet, which is really great for good articulation, good sharp, loud volumes. And then occasionally we'll need to play with wood. It's perfectly acceptable to play with wood mallets on a timpani as long as that mallet was designed for timpani. You don't want to use a drumstick necessarily on timpani, but a good round or oval wood mallet will sound just fine on a timpani head. Now those mallet heads will be mounted on one of three types of shafts. This is a bamboo shaft mallet. Bamboo is a very popular timpani material because it's really light and it allows the performer to manipulate the mallet really well. Occasionally you'll have just a standard wood shaft on timpani mallets. This is very similar to just a drumstick. Same materials, same weight, really easy to be able to transition from playing drum to playing timpani because it'll feel a lot the same. And then occasionally you'll also come across timpani mallets that are on metal shafts. Again, as long as you have a high quality head and it's mounted properly on a shaft and it's intended for timpani, it's going to sound great on that drum. We're going to talk about one of the most recognizable instruments in the band or the orchestra, the timpani, also known as the kettle drum in a lot of settings. Timpani are big and the bowls are made of copper. These are loud drums. They play in the bass section. They really reinforce the low sounds of our ensemble. Now the timpani has a lot of different parts to it. We're going to start at the top and work to the bottom. The part you actually play on the drum, This is called the batter head. Sometimes we just call it the head since there's only one of them on this style of drum. The batter head is pulled down by this metal ring around the drum. This ring is called the counter hoop. The counter hoop counters the head in tension. Through the counter hoop are these screws. These screws are called tension rods. The tension rods come down and screw into a turn block. Right? That turn block is also known as a pivot joint on timpani. The pivot joint runs down. There's a piece of metal inside this giant chunk of metal right here. We call this the strut. The strut is the frame of this drum. Inside that strut, there's a little tiny piece of aluminum that down here in the bottom comes out and all connects. Those aluminum pull rods are connected directly to these tension rods through these pivot blocks we talked about. Those pull rods pull down on the counter hoop, and that's what adjusts the pitch or the sound coming out of the head. From the pull rod, we connect to one main pull rod in the middle of the drum. That goes through the base of the drum, goes through another turn block, and connects directly to the pedal. So what we're able to do by moving the pedal, we're directly moving the tension rods, which move the counter hoop, which will change the pitch of the drum as well. As the pedal is pushed all the way forward, the drum will be higher in pitch. As the pedal is lowered, the drum will be lower in pitch. Now, there are two different types of pedals you're going to come across. The first of which this drum is an example of. This is called a balanced action pedal, meaning the pedal has tension and the head has tension, and the balance between the pedal and the head creates the different pitch. Now the head tension is created by the counter hoop pulling down on the head. The pedal's tension is controlled by this giant hand screw underneath the drum. That screw is connected to a very high tension spring. When we adjust the tension of the pedal to match the tension of the head, they get in balance with each other. That's why this is called a balanced action drum or a balanced action pedal. The other type of pedal you might come across is called a Dresden style pedal. Dresden pedals have still a foot plate on your pedal, but then they'll have a clutch that you move side to side with the outside of your foot, and then a gear. You move the pedal, you release the clutch, and it locks itself into the gear. And that's how we choose where the pitch is. There's no tension on the pedal, but because we have those locking mechanisms, the pedals stay in place. The advantage to a balanced action pedal is as soon as I move the pedal, it stays wherever it was when I take my foot off it. That's because of the tension on that spring. So again, this is an example of a balanced action drum. This is probably the most common style of drum you're going to find in a school setting. And most of you are probably playing on this style of drum. And those are the parts of the timpani, from the top all the way to the bottom. Equally as important as choosing the right triangle or the right beater is making sure you have a clip to hold your triangle that'll allow the triangle to resonate freely and produce really high quality sounds. There are lots of different triangle clips on the market, and you don't even have to buy one that was intended specifically for triangle. You can make them at home. Different types of triangle clips you'll come across are ones that are spring-loaded and can clip onto a surface, as well as ones that are just designed to sit on the shelf of a music stand or any other flat surface. You'll notice the difference here. I can clip this to this stand and it'll hold on. I can also just rest it on top of the stand as a shelf. Both have equal purposes. Clipping to the stand is a little bit more secure, holds the triangle in place. By just shelving it on the stand allows me to get to it quicker and allows me to be able to play it off the stand much easier. If you don't have good triangle clips at your school to your disposal, go to the hardware store and buy a couple of spring clips. Doesn't matter which size, the small ones, the large ones, any of them will work. And take them to your metal shop teacher or your wood shop teacher and ask them to drill a couple of holes in one of the handles for you. By drilling some holes in the handles, we can attach triangle string to that clip and it becomes a homemade triangle clip. This is a quick, low-cost way to add triangle clips to your program. Sometimes we'll use one triangle clip to hold the triangle. That allows us to hold the clip with one hand and play with the other. Sometimes our triangle parts are such that we have to play with two hands. I can slide a second triangle clip on the triangle and hold on to both closed corners of the triangle and then hang that from a music stand. That allows me to then grab two beaters, a match set will sound best, and play on the triangle with both hands. The last thing you'll notice about triangle clips is that they generally have two strings on the bottom of the clip. There's a very good reason for this. This is really about the weight of fishing line. If one of these were to break, the second one is a fail-safe. It's keeping the triangle from falling off the clip. When the triangle hangs from the clip, generally it only touches one of the two strings. Again, the second one is really just there as a backup. If you're going to make your own triangle clips or you're going to repair triangle clips, make sure you include two loops of string at slightly different heights so that you always have that backup to prevent your triangle from falling. Now, if you need to repair a triangle clip, if you have a broken string or you're making your own, I recommend go out to your local discount store or hardware store and just buy some heavyweight fishing line. This is 50-pound test fishing line, more of it than I will ever need for triangle clips in my life. But I just cut off a few inches of that. I can thread that through my triangle clip, tie a knot at this end, tie a knot at this end, and I'm good to go. You're going to want to make sure you tie really heavy-duty knots, maybe a couple of square knots on each end, something to really guarantee that that string will hold, because the triangle is pretty heavy compared to the fishing line. This has been an overview of different types of clips for the triangle, including how to make your own. Now, get yourself set up with some high-quality triangle clips so you're ready to go. One of the most fun instruments to play in the percussion section is the triangle. It seems so simple, but there's so many different things you can do with this instrument. Anytime you have a triangle part, the first thing you should do is experiment with different sizes of triangles, maybe made out of different materials, until you find the one that sounds like you're looking for. I do this by just trying out different triangles, all with the same beater. Until I find one I like the sound of. Once I've decided on a triangle, I may need to play with different options of beaters as well to really get the sound I'm looking for. This is just a straight stick beater, right? It's the exact same diameter from the bottom to the top. It's one piece of metal. These come in different weights. This is a really lightweight one. This is a really heavyweight stick beater. They produce different sounds, obviously. You'll notice one has significantly more attack and significantly more body to the sound, where the other one has a little more shimmer. Now, the weight of the beater doesn't necessarily dictate the volume. I can play incredibly soft with a heavy beater and pretty loud with a lightweight beater. What I'm changing is the articulation and the quality of the sound. I can also use what are called barrel or isolated beaters. Barrel beaters, the top may be made of aluminum or steel, or it may be made of brass or copper. The different sounds, you'll be able to hear them when you play your instrument. And really, this is an experimentation process. You want to find a beater and a triangle that work for the section you're playing. You might want to make a note of which triangle and beater you chose so that you can produce that same result again next time. One triangle and one beater may not be enough for an entire song. You may need a selection of triangles and a selection of beaters to really produce all the different sounds you want within the ensemble. Now, on the triangle, you can play in different areas. I can play in the center. I can play closer to the corner. I can play on the side. And each one's going to produce a slightly different sound. I also can change where on the beater I'm playing to get a slightly different sound. It's very important to remember that those different sounds are going to occur And it's very important for you as a musician to choose to change the sound and to strive for consistency when you're trying not to change the sound. Make sure you always play in exactly the same place with the same spot on the beater if you're going for consistency. Now remember, as a percussionist, you're truly a musician, and that means you get to make these decisions and you get to choose what sound you're looking for, and always make sure you're choosing the best sound for what works with the ensemble. One of the most fun instruments to play in the percussion section is the triangle. It seems so simple, but there's so many different things you can do with this instrument. Anytime you have a triangle part, the first thing you should do is experiment with different sizes of triangles, maybe made out of different materials, until you find the one that sounds like you're looking for. I do this by just trying out different triangles, all with the same beater. Until I find one I like the sound of. Once I've decided on a triangle, I may need to play with different options of beaters as well to really get the sound I'm looking for. This is just a straight stick beater, right? It's the exact same diameter from the bottom to top. It's one piece of metal. These come in different weights. This is a really lightweight one. This is a really heavyweight stick beater. They produce different sounds, obviously. You'll notice one has significantly more attack and significantly more body to the sound, where the other one has a little more shimmer. Now, the weight of the beater doesn't necessarily dictate the volume. I can play incredibly soft with a heavy beater and pretty loud with a lightweight beater. What I'm changing is the articulation and the quality of the sound. I can also use what are called barrel or isolated beaters. Barrel beaters, the top may be made of aluminum or steel, or it may be made of brass or copper. The different sounds, you'll be able to hear them when you play your instrument. And really, this is an experimentation process. You want to find a beater and a triangle that work for the section you're playing. You might want to make a note of which triangle and beater you chose so that you can produce that same result again next time. One triangle and one beater may not be enough for an entire song. You may need a selection of triangles and a selection of beaters to really produce all the different sounds you want within the ensemble. Now on the triangle, you can play in different areas. I can play in the center. I can play closer to the corner. I can play on the side. And each one's going to produce a slightly different sound. I also can change where on the beater I'm playing to get a slightly different sound. It's very important to remember that those different sounds are going to occur, and it's very important for you as a musician to choose to change the sound and to strive for consistency when you're trying not to change the sound. Make sure you always play in exactly the same place with the same spot on the beater if you're going for consistency. Now remember, as a percussionist, you're truly a musician, and that means you get to make these decisions and you get to choose what sound you're looking for, and always make sure you're choosing the best sound for what works with the ensemble. We're going to take a second and talk about how to tune timpani heads. At some point, the heads will be out of tune and they'll need adjusted. Now remember, when you're working with balanced action timpani, the tension on the head and the tension on the pedal are directly correlated to each other. So as we work on the head and change the tension on the head, that will also change the tension on the pedal, and we need to make sure to adjust the pedal accurately as well. Right now we're just going to talk about the head. Right? To tune the head, I'm going to push the pedal toe all the way down, which will bring the pitch of the head as high as it can possibly go. Then I'm going to just take my fingertip and I'm going to tap on the head, just slightly in, about 2 inches in on the head, and listen to each pitch. Now as I do that, not all of the areas are exactly the same. So I'm going to find the areas that sound slightly different. For instance, right there is a little low in pitch. And I'm going to take a timpani tuning key. Now understand, this is a different size than your standard snare drum tuning key. This is specifically made for timpani. And I'm going to adjust the tension rod located where I need to change the pitch. So that area is a little low. I'm going to turn that tension key clockwise, which will tighten the tension rod in the counter hoop until the pitches match. That's better. If I make an adjustment and it's not right, odds are I turned the key the wrong direction. No problem. Go back to where you were and go the other direction. This is sort of a trial and error process when you're getting used to doing it. Once all of the areas of the head are in tune with themselves, they sound the same, we call that clear. The head is clear. Now that we've cleared the head at its highest point, we're going to drop the pedal all the way back down to its lowest point. Now, we're going to tune the drum head to that starting pitch we talked about in that other video. And we're going to make sure, this is our 26-inch drum, so our lowest pitch should be a B. We're going to make sure now that with the pedal all the way down, this head is a B. If that's not a B, if it's a little flat, we would bring all of the tension rods up the exact same amount. If it was sharp, we would take them all down the exact same amount. This is pretty close. We're good to go. Now, with the head in the right low position, I know it's on a B. I'm going to take that pedal all the way back up again, and I'm going to check the top range and figure out what's the highest note on the drum. This is really just for my reference. Now I know what is the range of the drum. I've got a B at the bottom, and in this case, this top note, that's about an F sharp. So I know any music I come across with anywhere between a B and an F sharp, I can play on this 26-inch drum. Now, sometimes I need to adjust the drum to match the needs of the piece. A lot of modern music needs a low C on your 32-inch drum, so you may need to take your big drum and loosen the head all the way around. Now don't forget, if you loosen the head, you'll also have to change the pedal tension, keep them in balance with each other the entire time. Good rule of thumb when working on timpani at all times, just work in small increments. I'm never going to turn a tension rod more than a quarter turn. I'm never going to turn that pedal tension knob more than about a quarter turn. Work in small increments, use your ears, get the drums in tune, and you'll be good to go. We've talked about all the different things to help you be successful with your snare drum, your timpani, your mallet instruments, and a whole bunch of the auxiliary instruments you're going to use while playing percussion. Now that you have those tools, you can go off and be an even better percussionist while you're playing in your school band or orchestra. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Brett Hughes with Musician's Toolkit.